It was supposed to be a routine session. The air in the boardroom always carried that stale confidence. The smell of polished tables, expensive pens, and people pretending they'd already won. We were in the middle of quarterly negotiations, the kind of meeting where every sentence comes preloaded with motive. Daniel sat 2 seats down from me, calm as always, the same calm that used to hold the company together when everything else was on fire. He didn't look worried, but I should have known that serenity was a kind of warning, the quiet before an unnecessary war. When the motion came to restructure leadership for strategic agility, I knew exactly what it meant. Remove him. It wasn't about performance. It was politics, pure and sharpened. Daniel had disagreed with Linda, our CEO, one too many times about the upcoming merger. He wanted transparency. She wanted control. The board, including me, was caught between conscience and convenience. I told myself it was just business, that sometimes you cut off a good arm to save the body. But as I raised my hand in favor, I felt the tremor of something irreversible. The vote passed 6-3. Daniel didn't flinch. He stood, adjusted his tie, and simply said, "I hope you all know what you just voted for." His voice wasn't angry. It was tired, surgical. Then he collected his folder and left. Linda smiled. That clipped corporate smile, that means we handled it internally. But when the door closed behind him, the air didn't settle. It sank. Someone tried to crack a joke about champagne after the merger. No one laughed. That night, my phone buzzed with a single message from Daniel. "You mistook silence for surrender. Don't make that mistake again." I stared at it until the screen dimmed, wondering if it was a threat, a prophecy, or just exhaustion. I didn't reply. I should have, because 48 hours later, the inboxes began to flood. Withdrawal notices, contract terminations, and polite goodbyes from clients we'd courted for years. Every signature that had once trusted our word had vanished overnight, and suddenly, every hand that had voted yes felt just as heavy as mine. By Monday morning, the dashboard looked like a crime scene. Red flags across the CRM, churn alerts firing in clusters, and the pipeline that once glowed with projected revenue, now a gray wasteland. "It's a coordinated exit," Robbie whispered, leaning over my shoulder. He ran business ops, the kind of person who could smell a pattern before the data caught up. Same language in the notices, same timing. Someone orchestrated this. He didn't have to say who. We both knew. The strangest part? None of the clients mentioned Daniel by name. They cited misalignment, loss of trust, a shift away from the integrity we signed up for. These were words clients used when the product worked, but the people didn't. I pulled up the list of top accounts. Every single one had Daniel's fingerprints. He'd implemented their first integrations, stayed through botched go-lives, walked CFOs through midnight outages as if they were family emergencies. Linda thought she demoted a man. What she'd actually removed was tenure, memory, the connective tissue you can't see, but always feel. At noon, I called Thomas from Halcyon Health, our largest account. He didn't sound angry. That was worse. "We grew up with your team," he said, "but your decision at the top told us who you are now. We can't explain that to our people." I tried to sell him stability. The same deck, the same roadmap, the same QBR cadence. He cut me off. Roadmaps don't pick up the phone at 3 a.m. The line hummed after he hung up. In that hum, I heard the echo of Daniel's text. "You mistook silence for surrender." By evening, Linda convened an emergency huddle. She talked about calm strategy and short-term incentives to stabilize sentiment, as if we could bribe a heartbeat back into a body we'd already declared soulless. "We'll publish a letter," she said. "We'll spin restructuring as evolution." I looked at the faces around the table. Marketing nodding, legal drafting, HR composing empathy. No one said the only words that mattered. We were wrong. There's an arrogance that writes memos while the building quietly burns. That night, the fire alarms began to sound. Only we were the last to smell the smoke. By Tuesday, the office sounded different. Keyboards still clicked, meetings still filled calendars, but the undertone had changed, like a choir singing the same hymn in a half-step lower key. People spoke softly in doorways, lingering just long enough to confirm a suspicion, and then drifting apart before it hardened into a statement. 2 senior engineers submitted resignations before lunch. Personal reasons, they wrote. Everyone knew what that meant. Loyalty is an organ. When you remove the body it belonged to, it dies in transit. I called Daniel. He didn't answer. I tried again, then texted. We need to talk. Not to fix optics, to tell the truth. Minutes later, my phone lit up with a number I didn't recognize. You've got 5 minutes, he said, voice even. I told him about the exits, the copied phrasing, the red tide in the CRM. He didn't gloat. He didn't need to. Clients didn't follow me. He said at last. They followed the version of themselves they became when they trusted me. You voted to demote that version. They're just correcting the mirror. I swallowed the reflex to defend the board, to hide behind process. What would it take to stop the bleeding? I asked. An apology you don't know how to write, he said, and hung up. At the emergency stand-up, Linda announced a client assurance task force. New logo, same soul. She assigned me to lead it. We drafted a letter heavy with verbs that mean nothing. Recommit, reaffirm, re-engage, and sent to every account. The replies came back colder than cancellations. Appreciate the note. We've decided to move in another direction. The direction, it turned out, had a name. A small, quiet firm incorporated that morning, led by 3 people who resigned after Daniel walked out. The website had 1 page and 1 sentence. We picked up the phone at 3 a.m. that night. In the parking garage, I found Daniel leaning against a concrete pillar, hands in his pockets, as if he'd been there the whole time just waiting for me to shed my costume. Why show up? I asked. He shrugged. I worked a decade to help good people do good work. I'm not eager to watch them drown and make a point. The fluorescent lights hummed. I said the only true thing I had left. We were wrong. He tilted his head, weighing the sentence. Then act like it. The door to the stairwell clanged shut behind him. I realized confession without restitution is just theater, and we were already out of tickets. Wednesday's crisis council began with legalese and ended with weather reports. Everyone predicting storms while pretending to control the sky. Linda wanted decisive optics, a phrase that manages to be both empty and loud. I asked the floor and, for once, didn't soften it. We demoted the person who modeled reliability. I said, our clients didn't fire us for a feature. They fired us for a feeling. The only truthful move is to admit we were wrong and ask Daniel to lead stabilization on his terms. The room went very still. Half the board stared at their tablets, as if courage might sink over Wi-Fi. Linda smiled the way glass smiles before it cracks. We cannot set the precedent that decisions can be undone by tantrums, internal or external. This isn't a tantrum, I said. It's telemetry. Robbie slid a printout across the table. Cohort analysis, ticket response latency, renewal forecasts trending toward the floor. We have 8 weeks of runway if churn continues, he added. No one argued the math. The debate, as always, was moral, not technical. I drafted a plain language apology on the spot. 3 paragraphs, no adjectives, 1 ask. Help us fix what we broke. When I read aloud, the head of comms flinched like I'd sworn in church. We don't publish liability, she whispered. We publish leadership. I called Daniel from the hallway and put the phone on speaker. We're prepared to issue a full apology. I said, we want you back to steady the ship. A long pause hummed through the call. I'm not interested in returning to a room that taught itself to prefer control over trust, he said. But I'll meet with your top 5 accounts alongside your team if you show up with humility and no scripts. Also, 1 condition. The board publishes the apology as written, names the vote, and names the reversal. No mystique. I looked at Linda. She shook her head once, tiny and absolute. So I did the only thing that wasn't theater. I slid my resignation letter across the table and turned the apology into a personal message to every client I had ever touched. No template, no BCC. I wrote until my wrists burned. I told them what we chose, what it cost, and what I was prepared to do to make their teams whole, even if that meant helping them transition away from us. It wasn't strategy. It was atonement. By dusk, 2 clients replied with meeting links. We'll talk, they wrote, if Daniel's in the room. For the first time in days, I felt something like air. 2 days after my resignation, I sat in the same boardroom, this time as a guest, not a vote. The long table looked smaller, the confidence cheaper. Linda had lost her gloss. Exhaustion clung to her like static. Daniel walked in 10 minutes late, wearing no suit, no tie, just presence. The room went still. "You wanted transparency," he said. "Let's start with that." He laid down a folder, a schedule of meetings with every client who'd left. They're willing to talk, but not about contracts, about conscience. No one moved. He turned to me. "You coming?" I nodded. The next 48 hours were a blur of airport lounges, cold coffee, and rooms full of quiet anger. Every client said some version of the same sentence. "We trusted your people until you taught them not to trust each other." I didn't defend the company. I didn't defend myself. I took notes, said "you're right," and let the silence do what spin never could. By the second day, 3 clients agreed to reopen limited contracts under Daniel's new firm, not ours. "We don't need your brand," one executive told me. "We need your honesty," and his steadiness. That's when I understood what we had actually lost, not revenue, but relevance. When we landed back home, Linda was waiting in the lobby, flanked by PR. "Damage control starts now," she said, handing Daniel a draft statement. He didn't even glance at it. "Damage control?" he repeated softly. "No, Linda. This is damage acknowledgement." He slid the paper back across the counter, turned to leave, and paused beside me. "You finally wrote something worth reading," he said, referring to my apology emails. "Don't stop writing like that, even when it hurts." Then he left, and for the first time, no one chased him. A week later, I got an email from an unknown address. It was Daniel. "They'll rebuild the company. They always do. But some of us get to rebuild ourselves. Choose wisely which is harder." Attached was a short list of clients, people who'd asked if I was free to consult. I stared at the screen for a long time, realizing that redemption doesn't come as forgiveness. It comes as work. The board had wanted efficiency. Daniel had demanded integrity. I sat on the board when they demoted him during negotiations. 48 hours later, we lost every client. But what we really lost was the illusion that we ever had them. The first morning I wasn't a board member, I woke up before the alarm and didn't reach for a tie. Habit had me checking the dashboard anyway, a reflex I hadn't unlearned yet. The red bled less now, not because things were better, but because there was less left to lose. I brewed coffee and reread the replies to my apology emails. A few were blunt rejections. A few were open doors with conditions. Most were quiet acknowledgments, the kind that sound like, "We saw you this time." I realized how starved I was for sentences that didn't perform, that simply told. At noon, I met Ravi on a park bench 2 blocks from the office. He looked 10 years older and somehow freer. "I'm out," he said, no ceremony. They offered me a retention bonus big enough to feel like hush money. He handed me a thumb drive, handover of analytics templates, playbooks, the messy truth of how we actually kept promises. "This belongs with the people who will still pick up at 3 a.m., he said. I told him Daniel's firm needed someone who could turn signals into decisions without lying to themselves. He didn't say yes. He didn't have to. Some migrations begin with a walk in the same direction. That afternoon, I sat with Thomas from Halcyon in a windowless conference room that smelled like fresh carpet. No pitch, no slide deck, just a printed map of their next 12 months and a pen. "We're not coming back to your company," he said, "but we might borrow your courage if it stays pointed at the work." We drew out an incident rotation, escalation ladders, and a simple rule we both underlined. Whoever hears it first owns it. When the meeting ended, he shook my hand and said, "I don't reward perfect. I reward accountable." Walking out, I felt lighter than I had in years, as if integrity had a specific gravity lower than egos. Near dusk, my phone buzzed. A single text from Daniel. "We're hiring. Title, steward. Job, keep promises boring and on time. Interested?" I laughed, an actual laugh, not the boardroom kind that asked for witnesses. "Yes," I wrote back. Before sleep, I drafted one more message to Linda. "No venom, no victory lap. I hope you rebuild. If you want the apology we never published, it's attached. You can still sign your name to something true." I hit send and turned off the light. Somewhere between leaving and arriving, I understood the lesson my vote had tried to teach me too late. Clients don't buy vision. They buy who shows up when the vision breaks. My first week as steward began at 2:59 a.m. because, as Daniel likes to say, stewardship keeps terrible hours. The alert came through an on-call rotation we'd sketched on a whiteboard that still smelled like marker, telemetry jitter at a children's hospital, inventory counts drifting out of sync with pharmacy dispensing. Nothing cinematic, just the kind of bug that becomes a headline, if it lasts past dawn. I dial before the second beep. This is Adam. I heard it first, so I own it. The nurse on the other end didn't care about titles, only that a voice arrived with competence and quiet. We triaged, rolled back a patch, and wrote down every step while coffee cooled into a lesson beside my keyboard. At 3:41, the counts matched. At 3:43, the nurse said, "Thank you for not making me file a ticket." I muted the line and let myself breathe. Keeping promises boring felt like oxygen. At 9, we held a postmortem with 3 rules on the wall. No blame. No euphemisms. No heroes. Daniel facilitated like a conductor who prefers silence between notes. Ravi joined the call from a kitchen table cluttered with kids' crayons and the beginnings of a new life. We mapped the failure to a small arrogance disguised as best practice, the kind that writes code for an ideal day and forgets that hospitals don't have those. We shipped a fix and a footnote. If the world is messy, design like you live in it. That line made it onto our website before lunch, under a section called Principles We Pay For. That afternoon, an email from Linda landed in my inbox. No subject line, which told me she hadn't decided what the message wanted to be. "We publish your apology," she wrote, and pasted a link. I clicked. There was unedited, specific with signatures. The comments were brutal and, somehow, less important than the fact that the truth finally had stationery. "If you'll consult on a transition plan for critical accounts," she added, "I'll cover your fees and shut up in the room." I read it twice, then forwarded the note to Daniel with a single line. "We don't rescue brands. We route care." He replied with a thumbs up and a calendar, "Invite title bridges, not back doors." Near dusk, I walked the block to clear the hum from my head. The city looked the same as it had when I wore a board badge, but it felt lighter, like the gravity shifted to sit under the right things. My phone buzzed with a text from Thomas at Halcyon. "No incident today. Not luck. Habits." Well done. I typed and deleted 3 versions of Anytime, then settled on Always. On my way home, I passed the old office tower. The lights on the executive floor were still on. For the first time, I didn't feel the ache of being outside. Stewardship isn't about where you sit. It's about who you stand next to when the room goes quiet and the alarms begin to sing.